Hello, everyone. I'm doing my presentation today on neuroplasticity. I'm sure that everyone already incorporates this to a degree or has a vague familiarity with the idea, but I guess kind of diving into just some more specifics behind it and why I think it's so important with all of our work, no matter what theoretical orientation you follow, or even the client base, because it's applicable to, I think, everything within therapy. So I guess kind of just going over what we'll learn today. We'll just get into kind of what neuroplasticity is and why it's important. We'll talk about this idea of the negativity bias. We'll go into a specific tool called the physiological sigh, which I'll get into. We'll get into kind of the mechanics behind what's going on in the brain during these times. We'll talk about another idea of confirmation bias. And then we'll talk about combining CBT and neuroplasticity and just kind of wrapping it all up there. So I guess getting into why neuroplasticity today. So I've chosen to present on this because I think it can be really helpful for clients for understanding how the change is actually occurring within therapy. I've also recently written in a blog post for Head First Health, tying together the ideas of resistance presenting in therapy, and that being normal, and how we can respond to this with psychoeducation on neuroplasticity. Also, within the past year, I read this book here on the screen, and I thought that this was a really great tool with breaking down a lot of the talking points within the presentation and just getting better insight into neuroscience and how that's so relevant within therapy and being able to really talk with that with clients. I've had clients really benefit from reading this book. And it's specifically really helpful with clients who could potentially be skeptical of therapy or change in general, or distrusting themselves or their inability to change. So I think that these ideas today, this book specifically, really are great for those kind of clients. And then today you'll really see how relevant to CBT all of this is. So if you have any clients who talk negatively about themselves or are impatient with change, this psychoeducation today could be really helpful with incorporating into your work with those kind of clients. CBT really just kind of honed in on the process of neuroplasticity. So it's essentially they just found ways to implement that into therapy. So overall, I think learning the process of change at a neurological level and neuroplasticity is really important for motivating people for wanting to change and just trusting the process of really putting in those reps within therapy. So what is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change and adapt in response to the internal and external factors that shape it. The connections, functions, and structures of the neurons reorganize themselves in response to repetitive input. Neurons are responsible for communication information in our brain, and the more that we repeat something, the stronger the pathways of communication become. So a good analogy with clients is a hiking trail that gets clearer as we continue to walk on it. So more compact over time as people continue to walk that path. It becomes clearer and easier. So that's similar to these neural pathways that we're really talking about. It's just the more that we use those will become really that default setting. So I'm sure that you've heard that phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together. So when we continuously repeat thoughts to ourselves, like, I'm not good enough, the brain perpetuates this thought, it strengthens it, and it becomes deeply ingrained. So without even realizing it, this is then the background noise and often what we call in therapy that inner critic that's really gotten ingrained in there, that's running the show. When actions, responses, or behaviors become ingrained and performed almost instinctively without a conscious and deliberate decision-making process, neuroscience calls this automasticity. So this happens when we repeat something so that it becomes an automatic response with little cognitive effort or awareness. So this is where CBT and neuroplasticity can be applied to any habit that wants to change to really intercept there where that automatic response is coming up for us. So the reverse here is also true, that neurons that are no longer firing together, they lose strength over time. So therefore, as you're increasing the new positive habits, the negative habits are decreasing as we're no longer using those as well. So as we continue to decrease criticizing ourselves, those synapses decrease over time, making us less inclined for that to be the default anymore. So I'm sure that you've heard within the self-help genre a bunch of different numbers on like habit changes, like 28 days to a habit or 36 days till a new habit, those sorts of things. That's essentially getting at neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to change. And so that number varies so much, not because I don't think that any of them are right, but it's going to be very contingent on the habit that you're trying to change. So it's going to be contingent on like the difficulty of that habit, how ingrained that habit is in us, the complexity of that habit, all sorts of things. So yeah, just that even being further evidence of like habit change just essentially is neuroplasticity and really putting in that repetition. And yeah, I don't know if you've heard in session, but the phrase, but I've always been this way. I think this is a great time to give some psychoeducation on neuroscience and neuroplasticity. It encourages patience, hope, and evidence for why putting in the reps with therapy really works. It's not just, I think that oftentimes in those scenarios, it's almost like viewed as like a product of their deficiency, but instead being able to really explain what's coming up here on an evidence-based level. And then here, the picture is just showing the neuronal junctions where communication is happening between those neurons. So the synapses are strengthened when more communication occurs between them. So neuroscience shows that negative emotions actually elicit a much larger response in the brain than positive ones, meaning that we tend to pay much more attention to bad things and overlook the good ones. And so we call this the negativity bias. This is a product of evolution, and it did serve a purpose. So this isn't just a maladaptive feature, but it deeply is rooted in an evolutionary purpose, which was a survival mechanism. So was much more critical for our ancestors to avoid dangers like predators, environmental threats, than to seek out positive experiences. This innate tendency for the brain to prioritize negative information, even non-life-threatening ones, increased vigilance and promoted quick responses to potential danger. So increasing the chance of survival, reproduction, continuing on. So this makes sense from an evolutionary lens, but now in the modern day, some examples of this negativity bias could look like comments in therapy, such as, if I face a challenge at work, I'm going to fail and my team will hate my proposal. Or I'm afraid to think something positive and get my hopes up just to be let down. Or whenever my partner's in a bad mood, I assume that they are cheating. Or less attention and communication means that this person has stopped liking me. I'm sure that you can recognize some of the overlap or correlation with cognitive distortions here as well. So it could be useful to go through the cognitive distortions, but I also think it's really helpful for bringing psychoeducation into this idea with negativity bias, and just being able to kind of explain the impact of negativity bias, calling it into awareness where it's not really serving us, but simultaneously discussing the ability for change through neuroplasticity here. So kind of giving insight into where this is coming from, and how a negative focus was really key for our survival, but then also how a more positive focus is needed to thrive, have cognitive flexibility, be motivated, and how this can be done through CBT and neuroplasticity within therapy. So I'm sure that you can recognize a similar example. It's probably coming to mind that happens all the time within therapy. But an example of a negativity bias from sessions within an actual example could be the client has a work-related discussion with colleagues that leaves them feeling like they said something stupid. We could then implement a self-regulation tool, which I've listed here, the physiological sigh, which I'll go into at the next slide, but insert any self-regulation tool there. And then following with CBT. So the reframe here could be, your insecurity means that you're more likely to be nervous around other people, but you know that you didn't say anything stupid because this is your profession and your area of expertise. You're just worried that you did. So over time, their automatic response will no longer be to jump to negative conclusions, because those connections have weakened over time. So this is kind of showing like the progression of why this is important. Okay, so getting into a specific tangible tool here. Is anybody familiar with the physiological sign? Just like, have you heard that term? Okay, I'm sure that everybody uses various different breathing tools within therapy. I didn't know if this would be like redundant, something you already heard of, but I figured I would include it because I'm seeing it a lot within like podcasts, all sorts of like new research coming out. I wasn't surprised when she included it in this book. I think just based on like the efficiency and the ease of it, it makes a lot of sense to share this with all of our clients. Because especially ones who maybe aren't like really open for breathing techniques or mindfulness type things. Like this one is so simplistic that it's and rooted in a lot of evidence. So I think it's very important. So I guess kind of going into what's going on here is when we experience stress, our breathing rate increases and our breaths become shallow. So this leads to a buildup of carbon dioxide in the blood. So in incorporating this physiological sigh triggers a response in the brainstem that causes us to take 2 quick inhalations, which then brings in more oxygen. And then the long exhalation then removes the excess carbon dioxide from the body. So I guess I'll just kind of perform this here. So you see on that thing, but it's 2 consecutive inhalations and then 1 long exhalation. So it's like and it's the second one that's really the differentiator here of, I guess, just kind of slow paced breathing or a lot of other breathing techniques. Getting into it a little deeper, what's going on is the lungs are not just filled with air, but instead filled with millions of little air sacs. And when we get stressed, those little air sacs start to collapse. And we start to build up that carbon dioxide, which is adding to that stress within the body. This breathing technique reinflates those little stacks. And when you do that exhale, it gets rid of a lot of that carbon dioxide, which makes you less stressed. And the long exhale also slows down your heart rate, which just is essentially making this one of the fastest ways to be able to calm down. So it could be a really useful, efficient, simplistic regulation tool here. I guess kind of getting into what's going on here. So our brain has stored templates of previous experiences, memories, and scenarios when we're going about our daily lives. The brain is always checking for new experiences with previously stored templates of similar situations so that it can decide whether it's worthy of being brought to your conscious attention. This is controlled by the part of the brain called the salience network. If something is operating with the same level of automaticity as usual, then unless you pay attention to it by redirecting your thoughts and telling yourself that this is really important, it'll just keep repeating those prior templates. The purpose of these memory templates is to ensure that the brain is being energy efficient and doesn't encode new memories about the situation you're in, if the brain has already experienced that before. The evolutionary purpose here is if you had to be constantly checking your surroundings and making sure that everything around you was correct and that you were executing your actions in the exact same way every single day, it would be an extremely inefficient use of our energy. We would be exhausted by noon. I don't think the species would have, continued with that kind of energy consumption. So this was really crucial for energy preservation and actually a really great evolutionary feature for sure. But in the context of therapy, we can often acknowledge where that's maybe not helpful and needs to be brought to awareness. So these memory templates check everything on a subconscious level and only bring it to your attention if needed. So where this is not helpful, if you see things with a particular bias, but then you continue to go through life with that template in mind and see things the way that you believe them to be, if they're not actually accurate or helpful or in our best interest. An example here is like the cheating scenario. If a client was previously cheated on or something, but now they have a template for relationships, which tells them that their future partner will too. So this could, then have them start micromanaging micromanaging the relationship or looking for proof that they're correct with that memory template. So this is kind of getting into the idea of confirmation bias with that example there. So sometimes we move through life governed by those templates, and they form a confirmation bias. So confirmation biases are tendencies to interpret, search for, and recall information to confirm our prior beliefs or values. So back to that example there, the client could constantly be looking for information to show that their partner is more distant or less interested, and could be really honing in on only those things, looking for that confirmation bias, and actually really missing a lot of the other things that really create the whole picture on things. It's the same for negative self-beliefs. So if you believe that you're not worthy or not confident, or you have a negative belief about yourself, your body language follows that belief, and the brain perceives your behavior as normal over time and stops paying conscious attention to that belief. And before you know it, you've snowballed further, reinforcing that negative self-belief within everything that you do. So this is what cognitive behavioral therapy has really touched on, with the interconnectedness of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So more examples on the screen there. Just if you tell yourself that you're having a bad day, you'll go through the whole day finding reasons as to why the day is doomed. It might not be the reality of the whole picture, and we might really be omitting some things, but the brain will really hone in on those things to look for evidence for that confirmation bias. But then the same goes for things that we repeat to ourselves. So this could look like, I'm not attractive, I'm not good enough, I'm not intelligent, nobody likes me. We could continue to look for information to reinforce some of those thoughts throughout the day. Neuroplasticity and resilience. I think this is really important for being able to really reframe, I guess, like failures or setbacks, or insert, whatever word is coming up for the client, in which they're really hard on themselves about whatever they're going through. So incorporating that with neuroplasticity, teaching our brain that we can bounce back from setbacks, means that we all inevitably fail, but with that, we'll be more resilient and equipped to deal with whatever it is that we're going through. Our brains are designed to learn from that failure and to add to that database of experiences of how to and how to not respond to that in future scenarios. So failure is actually necessary for future success, because it teaches our brain about the world and also about ourselves. So by just, being able to reframe and talk about this idea of neuroplasticity, and then seeing failure as a positive learning outcome, I think that this can really help clients to build a resilient mindset, which just, I think, really motivates them to, further take on life's challenges with just a really optimistic mindset, leading to just overall mental well-being. It encourages people to really constantly evolve and adapt, and highlights the ability for growth, opposed to like that continuing to be something they're really hard on themselves about. So I guess breaking down neuroplasticity here, and the most simplistic kind of like formula here, it would be repetition plus attention plus intention equals lasting change. And we'll kind of get into more about that on the next slide too. But studies show that we have about 6.5 thoughts per minute. That's averaging 6,000 thoughts a day if one was sleeping 8 hours a night. So I think that this statistic can be really helpful for bringing into session as motivation for clients to stop talking badly about themselves, or just to be able to like really hone in on the impact of what that could look like because of that statistic. Because the more that this is repeated with 6,000 thoughts a day of negative thoughts towards self, we can really see how that's continued to be really reinforced. So being able to really zoom out within session here can help clients to stop looking at all of the negative things and repeating those patterns. Because if a client has created the neural pathways of negativity, the brain doesn't know right or wrong. It just knows the particular pathways that have been strengthened through repetition. The The triggers and responses could be negative for now, and just as we created them, we can also create strong associations between positive responses too. So really honing in on that component of things. So we can just then discuss the opportunity with client to now strengthen new pathways for change moving forward. I don't know if everyone uses CBT or if they use just aspects of it or if it comes up at some point, but just given like how relevant and prevalent it is today within therapy, I do think that it's like just one of the further reasons of diving it into this specifically today. So kind of going into that, CBT actively utilizes the brain's natural ability to change and rewire itself through neuroplasticity. So by practicing those new thought patterns and behaviors during cognitive behavioral therapy, that's when clients are physically altering their brain's neural connections and pathways, leading to that long-term improvement and managing emotions and whatever symptoms that they are currently experiencing. I think it's really useful to pair the two together to be able to give psychoeducation on neuroplasticity while working through CBT. And this can be varying degrees of that for sure. But I know that at first it can feel really uncomfortable for clients with presenting some new CBT thoughts, especially like challenging their thoughts or reframing some of those. So I think that kind of pairing that with some psychoeducation on neuroplasticity can be really helpful of kind of explaining like, this is going to feel uncomfortable in the beginning, or like why that doesn't feel like kind of that default setting. So kind of getting into these steps overall here. When you find yourself ruminating, the first step is to acknowledge that it's happening. And that's when we kind of start bringing that into awareness. We're starting to be able to like label that, give it some vocabulary within therapy, seeing some themes there. And it's important to discuss with the clients then that it's not helpful to shame ourselves now that we're starting to recognize that or being able to label that. Because there's nothing wrong with the brain, and being able to continue to reemphasize the same phrase of like the brain's just doing what it knows best for right now. So going back to that formula from the prior slide, we need two things to make changes as adults. It's attention and intention. I said it as adults, I suppose, because like quick caveat, because the brain at younger ages absorbs at much quicker capacities. And so it doesn't take so much intentional effort towards change because the brain is absorbing so much information at rapid speed. So I guess just why I specified as adults, but also tangent that neuroplasticity is capable at every age range. It doesn't stop at a certain point. So back to the idea of change is with that formula is attention and intention. So the brain areas of the reticular activating system and the salience network are responsible for ensuring that we shine a spotlight on what's important for us as we're receiving all of these inputs throughout the day. So an example of what that looks like is for those networks working and really siphoning through all that information is if you're sitting in a busy cafe and there is like all these smells happening, there's loud, music on, I can see, like out the window, things going on out there. There's a conversation going on in front of me with the person that I came with. Your brain's ingesting all of this information simultaneously, but also being able to tune in on what it knows is important, which is the conversation going on in front of your face. But you are mindful of like some of those other factors that I listed out. So that is just an example of those networks at play of being able to really prioritize and bring into the conscious level what it is we're specifically focusing on. So we have to intentionally tell the brain that this is important. After we find that rumination thing, we bring those networks into awareness and decide like this is important. So attention means that we are telling the brain this behavior is unwanted and we need to make a change with it. And then the intention component is putting in the work to make that change so we can stop repeating that negative self-talk. So this is when the brain kind of recognizes that we are no longer using those stored templates if this one wasn't helpful for us. And then the other part of that formula was the repetition component of just having to repeatedly do this. It's not a one-time thing for this, as I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. So then step 2 here is thinking of a positive habit to implement. So something maybe like that physiological sigh or something within mindfulness. If a client begins to intercept that negative thought with a physiological sigh, this will weaken the firing pattern of associated neurons, and the client can start dismantling some of those. This will also help regulate the nervous system back to a calm state so that they can analyze thoughts without the heightened emotions, which gets to step 3 here. So step 3 is essentially incorporating the CBT. So beginning to reflect or analyze, reframe those thoughts. And journaling can be really helpful at this step 2, which is an aspect that she talks about in the book. And she differentiates like why journaling is so important for rumination, because of this idea of when you're ruminating, you're not thinking in complete coherent thoughts. Sometimes things are bouncing all over the place, versus when you're sitting down to journal, you very much are writing within sentences. And so one, it takes longer to kind of get out some of those thoughts. But then 2, once we have to form them into a complete coherent thought, it's a lot easier to implement some of those CBT things. Like if we have to really challenge that thought, it's a lot easier when we're kind of seeing it on paper and had to make a complete thought about it. So I thought that was really interesting, just on how just beneficial journaling could be at that step. And step 4 is just allowing patience here. So when trying to change any behavior, it's crucial that clients do not beat themselves up for that lack of change. This will often make things worse. Negative reinforcement tells the brain, like, why even try? Because we're going to be met with something negative in that situation. Whereas positive reinforcement is actually the best option when trying to make a change. Complimenting oneself for the small wins and acknowledging them. This is where you'll notice clients don't really acknowledge how far they've come within therapy. So I think it's really important, just as therapists, to always be monitoring that and kind of reflecting that back to them, even like every session, honestly, like being able to really like reflect back any of those changes, because I think that's really motivating for moving forward, especially if they're struggling with being able to implement some of that positive reinforcement, but bringing some of that to light too. And then I think that like that phrase of, what was that phrase? Like healing and growth comes from self-love, not self-hate. I think that that's just like such a relevant phrase here with what this is exactly saying. Is I know that oftentimes people are inclined towards the self-hate one, but this is evidence as to why that actually isn't helpful for us. So just that positive reinforcement is really motivating and builds momentum with change. Positive reinforcements light up the reward center of the brain, which is what makes that so motivating. But yeah, specifically with clients who don't like compliments and they really struggle to sit with that, I think kind of talking about some of the science behind that and maybe why that could be coming up for them, and then starting to talk about the impact of positive reinforcement, I think could be really applicable and helpful here. So maybe these are things that you're already doing. These are very traditional like CBT questions, but just with some of that like analyzing and reframing component. Just some questions could be like, if you're feeling sad, can you find compassion for yourself? Does this thought help you take effective action towards making a change? What new story or thought could you focus on now? Can you stop comparing and meet yourself with compassion and gratitude for the things that you already have? How can you see this in a different way? Or just because you've compared yourself to someone else, does it mean that you are any less? Just some additional ideas for being able to further kind of analyze, explore some of those thoughts during all of these time periods of change in which, or topics of change in which resistance might come up and we might need to challenge, reframe some of those things. So yeah, just overall, I think it's really important to discuss at some capacity at some point, because I think that it encourages patience, hope, and evidence as to why putting in the reps with therapy really works. And like I said, briefly earlier, I think it's going to really be contingent on the client that you're working with. I'm pretty mindful of ensuring that it's not, a snooze fest for some that might not be interested in these sorts of things and might lightly touch on these sorts of things. Whereas some other clients love evidence and explanation on certain things, and I might dive deeper into it. But at varying capacities, I think that all clients can really benefit from this. I've specifically mentioned a couple of examples. If it's clients that are struggling with the ideas of, skepticism surrounding therapy, or distrust within therapy, or distrust in themselves, some of those comments of like, well, I've always been this way. And being able to really bring in the psychoeducation piece of normalizing, like, these are the pathways the brain knows best, but we have evidence as to like why now we can start to lean into some of those other pathways. And those are going to be more of that default setting moving forward. So I think it's really great to be able to incorporate that information. Exploring this deeper, I would really recommend that book, Rewire by Nicole Vignola, either for yourselves or for clients who are struggling with this and would love to take a deeper dive into some of the tools within neuroscience explaining kind of what's going on for them. And then I listed this here. The article coming up in which I explore deeper just on the Head First Health blog. The title is Embracing Resistance, How Challenges in Therapy Support Neuroplastic Growth and Goal Achievement. This just gives some more of my personal thoughts on resistance within therapy and how that's all part of the process within neuroplasticity. So if you're interested in that, you could read further on that. But yeah, any questions here?
Do you have any examples of different clients that you've worked with that you've really seen some of their neuroplasticity kind of shift and evolve from your work together?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a reoccurringly one is just being able to give themselves credit for things. So as like that reflecting some of their growth and how they're able to start like giving themselves credit for some of these things. One, it kind of leans away from that negativity bias thing of like only seeing the negative within things. They can start to shine light on some of those other things, seeing the full picture. But then I think that simultaneously starts to, if I started to have to reflect it, I think that they, inevitably also start then seeing it, agreeing with it, then start to report on it themselves. And then, I think that shows as a really motivating factor for continued change and I guess really simultaneously decreasing that inner critic. I guess it's kind of like a general overview of how that's looked, but I've definitely seen that kind of come full circle there. Does anyone currently utilize incorporating any kind of psychoeducation on these topics, or even just in any of the examples today, find it to be applicable within their work?
I really like the piece that you talked about with the patterning, because I feel like that's something that I have to remember for myself and remind clients that this is not you.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of goes into IFS and parts work and things, but like this is not you, this is a pattern, and patterns are always changeable. And so I love putting it into this physiological response that shows there's actually this physical change. Look at the neurons, look at the synapse, this will literally start to change on a physical level, not just us thinking something differently. So I like that you highlighted that. And I feel like that's a piece of psychoeducation that I'm often saying, oh, this is a pattern. Oh, this is a behavior. Behaviors can change. Patterns can change. And then being able to pull up the unhelpful thinking style sheet and be like, well, which one do you typically fall into? And how can we then begin to address that and look for that specific patterning?
Yeah, because like I mentioned earlier, I think that without that insight, it often is viewed as this, product of deficiency, or this idea of I was just born this way, versus the this is just been the repetition component of it. And I think that gives hope for change.
Yeah. yeah, and even that could be challenged. Like, oh, like you're just born this way. Like, where did you learn that?
Mm-hmm.
Like versus this evidence and this data that shows like, yeah, like the way that you're born does matter, and also there's flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple questions I have. Like the first is with the sigh. Do you just like throw that out there with clients? You just like, hey, I learned this new thing, like kind of like also guiding us. Like, should we just throw it out for clients? Of, oh, I had this training, I learned this new thing. Let's try it together. Like, how do you put it out there so it's digestible and also can feel like a little awkward if we're just like, all right, let's do this quick breathing thing. But I
Yeah.
get it.
I would normally bring it up in the context of something that I think is applicable. I wouldn't normally just, throw that out of nowhere, but well, oftentimes too, when I learn something, I think that I probably think of a specific client. So I will note that for sure of like, okay, this could be very helpful here. But I probably would wait for the context to come up or something to interject with like, I know of this great tool that I think that could be really helpful here, and being able to quickly kind of release some of that stress and just being able to kind of go through like asking if they're interested, I suppose, because I don't want to just be sharing my like breathing stuff if they don't care about that, because I do find that that's the case sometimes. So always meeting them where they're at, but I guess just offering that tool, and then just going through it like that in session. I could look up, I guess, some specific videos on it, but it is so simplistic. I think it's pretty easy to just go through within session.
Got it. Okay, so you kind of keep it there for yourself, and then when you see it,
Yep.
you throw it out. Okay. And then another question I had with I love that, what was it? It was like repetition plus attention plus intention equals lasting change.
Yeah.
How do you help support the client in choosing the intention? Because I think that's sometimes where things can get a little sticky, where it's like, if their intention is, let's say their intention is they want to be really, let's say they choose, they're like, I want my intention to just be more grateful. I want to be filled with more gratitude. And maybe we're over here thinking like, wait, like I think maybe if the intention is being more assertive and actually stating, instead of just like bypassing everything with gratitude, like if we can have the intention to state more things. So like as a therapist, if you feel like, oh, this might be, I don't want to say a better intention, but then the client is choosing an intention that maybe isn't necessarily going to be helpful. Like I feel like that's where things can get really like sticky and kind of cross over. So how do we address that?
I think I would take more of kind of the motivational interviewing technique on that. I don't know if I would completely dismiss what they were, doing at that moment, but I guess just kind of asking some of those questions in regards to like, I guess, why they gravitated towards this, like kind of asking questions, getting to like, what is this trying to get at with like improving it, and then kind of interjecting some things of, oh, but it looks like I thought we were kind of trying to address this. I'm not sure if gratitude's going to be the most helpful with this. I guess kind of sort of asking those questions to, I guess, help them arrive at the answer on their own if it's in line with actually what we've discussed is the problem at hand.
Okay, beautiful. Got it. So just kind of like dissecting it a little bit further with them. What would you hope the end goal would be if we were to do more of this? And then see, okay, either it aligns or, oh, wait, I see a contradiction here.
Yeah, if there's a misalignment, then I guess like continuing that discussion.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I was going to add one more idea too on the physiological side with the like where that would be most applicable. I think it could also be like a specific context where I said I'd wait for context to come up, is that component of if they are struggling with CBT, if we've been talking about CBT, whatever, reframing certain thoughts, and they are really struggling with that emotion component of it, and they are, responding with a lot of resistance of like, I was just too emotional. I did not even want to think about another one. That's when I would kind of start to, further hone in on, I suppose, self-regulation tools, the importance of those. That could be a specific context for interjecting that.
I love that. Great radar.
Any other questions? All right.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
This was, I felt like I was like back in psych class. I'm like, ooh, like it felt so stimulating. So thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. See you next week. Have a beautiful week. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.